You are standing on a country road on a nice summer day. Suddenly, you hear two sounds in the distance, the first familiar, but the second growing closer and louder very quickly. A shadow zooms over your head, and you see a crop dusting plane flash over, on its way to spray a field for insects. The second sound is slower, but more familiar. It's that of a tractor pulling fertilizer out to a different field. How are these rural activities different from those activities of long ago, and how do they relate to our food on our plates today? You are listening to a podcast created by the Minnesota Alliance for Geographic Education. Our mission is to help you understand your world better through geography. Our presenter is Dr. David Lanegren, Professor of Geography at Macalester College in St. Paul and Director of the Minnesota Alliance for Geographic Education. Today, Dr. Lanegren discusses agricultural revolutions and how the study of plants in the past help us today from a geographic point of view. Students who listen to this podcast may benefit more from this podcast by dividing a note-taking sheet into 3 parts organized around the first, second, and third agricultural revolutions. Look for the time era when they took place, and also for features of that revolution. This podcast is directed at Minnesota Geography teachers and addresses the following Minnesota Geography standard: 9.3.2.4.3. Some devices playing this podcast will show visuals, chapter controls, and clickable internet links. I am Fred Kunze, a steering committee member of MAGE.
Geographers and cultural historians study the evolution of our food supply, and we divide it into a couple of revolutions. The first agricultural revolution, the so-called Neolithic Revolution, was hugely important because it changed the population from being hunting and gatherers to being settled agriculturalists and led the way, made it possible for us to become city dwellers. And frequently, students wonder, why should we actually learn about this thing that happened such a long time ago, and why do we care where the potato was domesticated, and who really cares where wheat was first domesticated? Well, there's the intellectual aspect of knowing where all this began, and geographers have spent a great deal of time working all this out with a specialist who are called plant geographers, who travel to remote locations and try to find the wild ancestors of the crops that we now depend upon for the survival of the species. As I've said, this is an interesting intellectual activity, but it's also fundamentally important to the future of the species on the planet. As time has gone by, we have made our crops more and more specialized, so we grow many fewer varieties of plants than we used to. So we used to, would grow hundreds of varieties of tomatoes, and now we grow a handful. So there's been this great reduction in the genetic material that produces the crops that we eat. Now, there are lots of reasons that people say that this is bad because it, makes the food less interesting and so on. But that's not what I want us to focus on. I think we need to remember that while we are living on the planet, other organisms are as well. And one of these groups of organisms we call diseases, plant diseases. And the plant diseases evolve very fast. So as we have begun to practice an agricultural type that's called monocropping, meaning that we grow large fields of the same crop like wheat or corn or soybeans or sugar beets, sugar cane, cotton, rice, these monocropped fields are very susceptible to diseases. So we are constantly working on developing new herbicides and new insecticides to protect our plants. But in the third agricultural revolution, we've developed the ability to transfer genetic material and to selectively breed plants that are resistant to diseases. Now, I think everybody knows that there's a huge profession, which we call the medical profession, designed to keep humans healthy. There's another profession called plant pathologists who work to keep the plant community that we eat healthy. And as the diseases continue to modify and adapt to our crops, these plant pathologists and geneticists need to have access to new and different genetic material so that they can continually produce new disease and insect-resistant crops well into the future. So it's important for our survival to know where the wild ancestors are of the plants we eat, because those wild ancestors have a greater variety of genetic material than the domesticated crops we eat right now. So, in your geography course, where there's that little piece on where crops were first domesticated and where animals were first domesticated, that's important. It's important so we know where we came from, but it's also important to know how are we going to survive in the future when all these diseases and insects that share the planet with us are continually evolving to eat our crops.
You have been listening to a production of the Minnesota Alliance for Geographic Education. Background music is courtesy of Jim Hogue of Decorah, Iowa. The Minnesota Alliance is a non-profit group of educators and other parties who are interested in promoting an enhanced understanding of our world through improved geographic literacy.